Hello guys, welcome to my channel where stories filled with revenge, moral lessons and love are told. Don't forget to like, share this with your friends, and subscribe for more touching stories. I still remember the morning like it was carved into my memory with a knife. The sunlight barely made it past the glass towers of downtown Chicago, yet my stomach churned with an unease I couldn't shake. My name is Harper Nolan, and I have spent the last 6 years building the backbone of one of the most ambitious fintech startups in the city. I wasn't just another back-end engineer. I was the architect of the systems that kept millions of dollars moving smoothly, invisible but indispensable. And yet, that morning, all my years of work and quiet sacrifices meant nothing. Mason Rivers, our CTO, called me into the main conference room. He didn't even bother to shut the door properly. It was as if the entire office needed to witness my humiliation. Mason was always flamboyant, the kind of person whose confidence teetered dangerously close to arrogance. He had a way of looking at you like you were either brilliant or utterly dispensable, and that morning, it was the latter. "Harper," he started, his tone sickly sweet, "we've reviewed your performance and we think it's time to part ways." The words hit me like a brick. I blinked, certain I'd misheard him. My brain scrambled to catalog the reasons for bugs in the code. Missed deadlines? Mason smirked, reading my disbelief. "You've been redundant. The team needs fresh energy. Your contributions, well, they'll be archived. That word was worse than any insult I could imagine. As if every line of code, every late-night debugging session, every architecture diagram I painstakingly built could be boxed into oblivion like it never existed. My heart raced, anger rising in tandem with humiliation. I tried to protest, to remind him of the 3 major system upgrades I had rolled out last quarter, the migration from legacy servers to cloud clusters, and the fault-tolerant protocols I had designed. Mason waved a hand dismissively. "We appreciate it, Harper, but this is the company's decision. HR will handle the rest." The HR representative, a young man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, handed me the termination papers. The non-compete clause gleamed at me like a prison sentence. No work in fintech within 50 miles for 2 years. My unemployment benefits? Denied. Every procedural safeguard that should have cushioned this kind of blow had been stripped from me. I felt naked, powerless, and deeply betrayed. My peers, some of whom I had mentored, looked away. The room was cold, sterile, and judgmental. I realized then that I was completely alone. I walked out of the office with a small cardboard box holding my personal items. The ride home was a blur. I stared at the reflection of myself in the rearview mirror, trying to reconcile the confident, capable engineer I knew I was with the shell of anger and despair staring back. I tried to imagine the life I had spent years building in those fluorescent-lit cubicles, erased in less than 15 minutes. I thought about Mason Rivers laughing in his office, thinking he had won. But he didn't know me. He didn't understand the quiet persistence that had carried me through countless all-nighters and system failures. Once I reached my apartment, I dropped the box on the floor, pacing as the adrenaline subsided and a quiet, simmering fury settled in. The humiliation stung, yes, but beneath it, a seed of strategy began to grow. I remembered every moment Mason had ignored my suggestions, every time he had belittled my warnings about security vulnerabilities, every time he had claimed credit for features I had designed. And suddenly, what felt like despair transformed into a kind of clarity. If he thought erasing me from the company's records would destroy me, he was gravely mistaken. I spent the next few nights combing through my memory of the company's systems. Every architecture diagram I had drawn, every repository I had contributed to, every email thread that proved my involvement, I visualized it all. I had always been meticulous, saving local backups of personal notes, version histories, and documentation. Mason Rivers never knew the extent of my precautions, and that ignorance would soon be his undoing. I felt a strange thrill. The humiliation, the betrayal, the injustice, it was fuel, but I also realized something else. This wasn't about immediate revenge. The world of tech, of corporate politics, was a long game. Mason was arrogant, overconfident, and entirely convinced he had cornered me. And yet, every time I replayed the memories of his dismissive sneer, I understood that the tools I needed were already in my hands. My expertise, my archives, and my relentless determination. I couldn't rush into a public confrontation. It would play into his ego. Instead, I had to plan meticulously, quietly, and with precision. During those initial days, I took stock of my network. Devin, one of the interns I had mentored during my migration project, and Kara, a brilliant but under-recognized engineer from another team, were my first thoughts. They respected my work, understood the architecture I had built, and crucially, were both fiercely loyal. Reaching out to them discreetly, I proposed a conversation. In a quiet coffee shop tucked away in a side street, we met and I outlined my vision. We're going to build something better, I told them, keeping my voice low, measured, but carrying an edge of certainty. They nodded, their eyes reflecting a shared indignation and excitement. It was the first real spark of hope I had felt since Mason had humiliated me. I also began to catalog the financial and operational vulnerabilities Mason had left exposed. His overconfidence in the system's resilience, the lack of proper redundancy outside of the modules I had implemented, the neglect of thorough documentation, it was all there. I had created it, and now I knew precisely how fragile it was without me. The thought was bitterly satisfying. It was like holding a map of someone else's trap, a trap they had assumed would ensnare me. And while the law and human resources were silent in my favor for now, I sensed that patience, strategic leverage, and an understanding of legal loopholes would eventually tip the scales. Night after night, I sat at my small desk, surrounded by notes, diagrams, and the faint hum of my laptop. I recalled Mason's face as he waved me out the door, the smug certainty that I was powerless. And I began to plan not out of vengeance alone, but out of the necessity to reclaim control, to protect my legacy, and to ensure that no one could ever erase me so completely again. The anger was a sharp instrument, but I tempered it with methodical thinking. Every keystroke I typed, every file I saved to my encrypted personal drive, was a quiet act of reclamation. I realized that sometimes the first step in revenge was survival, careful, quiet, deliberate survival. By the end of the week, I had stabilized my immediate life, secured personal copies of every essential document and repository I had access to, and created a secure plan to move forward. Mason Rivers had thought he could obliterate me in a single meeting. He had underestimated the depth of preparation and resilience that quiet professionals like me cultivate. I wasn't going to confront him publicly or react in haste. I would let the system, the law, and my own technical mastery do the work. I closed my laptop that night with a strange sense of calm. The humiliation would fade, the anger would transform into focus, and the path forward was clear. I was not beaten. I was merely beginning. The first thing I realized after leaving Mason Rivers' office was that every moment of despair had to be transformed into strategy. I knew I couldn't just storm back into the company or lash out on social media. That would have been predictable and reckless. Instead, I began by taking stock of everything I had quietly archived over the years. Every commit log, architecture diagram, design note, and even internal email threads that proved my contributions. Most engineers save snippets of work for personal reference, but I had been unusually meticulous. Every system dependency I had built, every optimization for the backend, was documented, backed up, and encrypted. What Mason didn't know was that I had already laid the foundation for a potential comeback long before this firing. I set up a secure workspace in my apartment. The hum of servers and encrypted drives surrounded me, a quiet orchestra of preparation. Devin and Kara had agreed to assist, both understanding the stakes without me having to spell it out in detail. We met in private, discussing infrastructure, blueprints, and the modules that would form the skeleton of the product we intended to build. We need something faster, leaner, and modular, I explained, tracing diagrams across a whiteboard. Kara nodded thoughtfully. The legacy system is brittle. Without you, Mason's platform is vulnerable. We can make something better, something he can't touch, Devin added, and if we stay smart about legal boundaries, there's no way they can stop us. The plan began to take shape with quiet precision. Around the same time, I started monitoring legal developments. I had always been interested in tech policy, but suddenly it became a lifeline. News broke that the state legislature had passed a law invalidating non-compete clauses for tech workers. My non-compete, once a weapon used to contain me, was now unenforceable. The irony was almost poetic. Mason Rivers had assumed that contractual obligations would silence me. Instead, legislation had swung the door wide open. I studied the law closely, noting that it allowed me to freely work in my domain without fear of immediate legal reprisal. I realized then that my revenge wouldn't be messy or emotional, it would be quiet, methodical, and above all, lawful. I began dividing my time between technical reconstruction and legal preparation. Every line of code I wrote for our new platform was original but leveraged the deep understanding I had of the company's architecture. I focused on speed, scalability, and security in ways Mason had ignored, always mindful of staying beyond the reach of intellectual property claims. I also cataloged evidence of my prior contributions, emails, internal discussions, and system logs that could be used in court to demonstrate that much of the company's operational backbone relied on my work. I didn't gloat or vent, I merely documented, measured, and built. The process was exhausting and required unwavering discipline. I worked late into the nights, fueled by coffee, adrenaline, and a quiet sense of vindication. Devin and Kara were invaluable. Their trust and competence meant that every feature we developed was robust. We created test environments, stress-tested modules, and documented every improvement meticulously. The more we built, the more I realized how fragile Mason's platform was without my contributions. Vulnerabilities that had been ignored for years became glaringly obvious. I felt a subtle satisfaction knowing that the very system he had relied upon was weaker than he believed. Parallel to the technical work, I also began quietly networking with former colleagues and mentors. Some were surprised to hear about my firing, others were quietly supportive, offering advice on potential investors and resources. I learned quickly who could be trusted, because discretion was critical. Mason's arrogance had made him underestimate how many people respected my skill and integrity. Every conversation I had was strategic. Every connection built a lattice of support that could be leveraged later. I realized that revenge in the tech world isn't about destruction, it's about influence, positioning, and control. Months passed, and our platform began to take shape. We had built a backend system faster, more modular, and easier to maintain than the one I had left behind. It was a quiet triumph, almost meditative. The excitement wasn't in flashy announcements or social media drama. It was in the precise act of creation, the knowledge that our work could stand independently of Mason's company, and the certainty that we had done it right. Every error caught, every bottleneck eliminated, was a small but potent victory against the arrogance that had once tried to erase me. One evening, while reviewing documentation, I noticed a crucial oversight in Mason's company's security logs, a subtle gap that could have led to data inconsistencies. It was a reminder of how dependent they still were on the infrastructure I had maintained. I didn't exploit it, but I noted it for context, knowing it would be useful if legal disputes arose. My revenge wasn't about sabotage, it was about demonstrating that my work had value, and that the company's underestimation of me could have costly consequences. Every step of the way, I kept my actions ethical but precise, avoiding impulsive moves that could compromise the strategy. By the time the platform was ready for initial trials, we had a fully functional product, better than the legacy system. In nearly every measurable way, the satisfaction of seeing it run flawlessly, knowing that it was built quietly, without fanfare, and on principles of precision and excellence, was intoxicating. It wasn't just a technical victory, it was a moral one. We had taken Mason's underestimation and transformed it into a superior creation, a demonstration that skill, preparation, and patience outshine arrogance and cruelty simultaneously. I worked with a lawyer who specialized in intellectual property. Every note, diagram, and commit log I had archived became a potential pillar in building a case that recognized my contributions. The new legislation nullifying non-competes gave us a strong position, but I also wanted to ensure that any legal action was airtight. We documented everything meticulously: timelines, contributions, proof of prior ownership of key modules. Every precaution was taken to avoid any loopholes Mason could exploit. This wasn't just revenge. It was justice delivered through preparation and strategy. As the weeks turned into months, I could feel the quiet tension building. Mason Rivers remained unaware of the full scope of what we had accomplished, confident in his narrative that I had been a replaceable cog. I smiled privately at the irony. The underestimation of talent, the arrogance of dismissive leaders, and the fragility of systems built on unacknowledged expertise, all of it was stacking quietly in my favor. Devon and Kara were not just colleagues, they were allies in a carefully orchestrated plan that would eventually shift power dynamics without theatrics, without immediate confrontation. By the time the platform was stable, fully functional, and ready for public launch, I had turned months of humiliation and uncertainty into a quiet, unstoppable force. Every technical decision, every legal preparation, every trust-based alliance had coalesced into a singular goal: to reclaim control and demonstrate the consequences of underestimating dedication, skill, and foresight. The plan wasn't about screaming revenge, it was about absolute, methodical, undeniable validation. Mason Rivers' arrogance had created the conditions for his own downfall, and I had quietly built the evidence, the tools, and the legal leverage to ensure it would happen. By the time the lawsuit was ready to be filed, I had spent nearly a year quietly preparing for this moment. Mason Rivers still believed he had eradicated any threat I posed, and the irony was delicious. My legal team, armed with meticulously documented evidence, filed the case citing intellectual property infringement and the illegal enforcement of the non-compete clause, which the new state legislation rendered null and void. The first court date felt surreal. I sat quietly in the courtroom, dressed simply, my hands resting on my lap. I wasn't there to perform, to scream, or to plead. I was there to assert undeniable truth. Mason entered, his tailored suit crisp, his smirk just a shade too confident. He didn't know that the calm, controlled woman sitting across from him had quietly orchestrated a battle that he couldn't win. The proceedings began, and the evidence was laid bare. Every email, every repository log, every archived document demonstrated that the core architecture of his company's platform was my creation. Witnesses, including former colleagues and interns, corroborated my contributions. Devon and Kara had been strategic witnesses, explaining how the system functioned, why my design decisions were critical, and how removing me had left gaps that could have caused catastrophic failures. Mason tried to argue that the work had been collaborative, that I had no claim over it, but the meticulously organized records told a story far more compelling than his arrogant assertions. The judge, after reviewing preliminary documents, allowed the case to move forward swiftly. The air in the courtroom felt charged, a quiet electricity that seemed to hum with the inevitability of justice. Outside, the media had caught wind of the legal battle. Tech blogs and business reporters started questioning Mason Rivers' leadership. The narrative was shifting subtly from Harper Nolan's supposed incompetence to the story of an indispensable engineer who had been unjustly fired. I made no public comments, no interviews. The silence itself became a statement. My actions were speaking louder than any press release could. Investors began whispering among themselves, clients asked discreet questions, and Mason's confidence began to show cracks. I focused on the courtroom strategy, knowing that a calm, calculated legal presentation would have more impact than any social media outburst. The trial stretched over weeks, each session a careful demonstration of my case. The legal team walked the court through technical schematics, version histories, and architecture timelines. I watched Mason's face in the gallery. His smirk faltered as the evidence systematically dismantled his claims. He had underestimated the power of thorough documentation and the impact of a quietly executed, legally grounded strategy. The law was on my side, and my meticulous preparation left him exposed. When the judge finally ruled in my favor, awarding me ownership of critical intellectual property and granting licensing rights that ensured ongoing financial compensation, the relief was profound, yet subtle. I didn't celebrate loudly. This was the quiet triumph of patience, skill, and strategy. With the legal victory secured, I turned fully to the product we had built with Devon and Kara. The launch was deliberate, measured, and completely independent of the old company's brand. We named the platform Solara, emphasizing speed, modularity, and resilience, the qualities Mason had overlooked in his overconfidence. Early adopters, investors, and industry insiders quickly recognized its superiority. Testimonials poured in. about its reliability and efficiency. Solara wasn't just a product. It was a symbol of what could be achieved when expertise, preparation, and ethics were aligned. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very company that had tried to erase me was now effectively endorsing my work through its absence of competitive alternatives. Mason Rivers' company began to crumble. Clients who had once relied on the old system realized the limitations, the downtime, and the inefficiencies that had been masked when I was employed there. Investors started pulling back, wary of leadership that had undervalued and mismanaged talent. I never gloated publicly, never sent a single message of derision. Instead, Solara's growth, stability, and innovation were enough. The quiet, methodical dismantling of Mason's professional credibility was happening without theatrics, fueled solely by excellence and strategic advantage. I remember sitting in my new office one evening, watching the city lights reflect on the glass, thinking about how far I had come. The humiliation, the injustice, the non-compete clause, all of it had been transformed into a vehicle for triumph. Devon and Kara had become trusted collaborators, their dedication and skill invaluable. Throughout the journey, together, we had built something that wasn't just better technically. It was ethically sound, legally protected, and strategically unbeatable. The calm satisfaction I felt was unlike any adrenaline-fueled victory I had ever imagined. This was controlled, absolute, and forever. There were moments when I revisited Mason's emails, the ones he had sent boasting about erasing me from the company. I smiled quietly at their irony. He had assumed that removal equaled victory, that humiliation would end my career, but it hadn't. Instead, it had been the catalyst for my most meticulous, strategic, and ultimately powerful act of revenge. By respecting the law, relying on precise documentation, and building a superior product, I had reclaimed control. Mason Rivers had underestimated the quiet power of preparation and intelligence, and he had paid the price. The media eventually reported the outcomes, highlighting Solara as a breakthrough product and noting Harper Nolan's legal victory as precedent-setting in tech employment law. I didn't make interviews or post celebratory updates. I let the platform and its users tell the story. The public, investors, and former colleagues could see the results without any dramatics. The company Mason had built on arrogance and talent. Suppression was forced into a shadow of its former self, while my creation thrived openly and transparently. It was the ultimate lesson in how strategic patience and intellectual rigor could outperform aggression and hubris. Looking back, I understood that this journey had been about more than revenge. It had been about reclaiming my agency, asserting the value of my work, and demonstrating that ethical, patient, and strategic action could triumph over arrogance and cruelty. Every late-night coding, every document meticulously archived, every legal consultation, each had contributed to a victory that was absolute yet quiet. Mason Rivers' fall wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was methodical, inevitable, and entirely deserved. Solara became a symbol of resilience and expertise, a reminder that true power often resides in those underestimated and overlooked. I never needed to shout, to insult, or to humiliate publicly. I let the law, my skills, and the superior product speak for themselves. Mason's downfall and my rise were the result of preparation, discipline, and unwavering focus. That, more than anything, was the revenge I had sought, not through spectacle, but through undeniable mastery and control. Moral lesson: this story reminds us that true victory is quiet, deliberate, and rooted in preparation. Humiliation, injustice, or betrayal can feel devastating in the moment, but patience, foresight, and ethical strategy can transform those challenges into opportunity. Harper Nolan's journey shows the power of documenting one's work, cultivating trust with collaborators, and understanding legal landscapes. Skills, knowledge, and perseverance often become our strongest weapons against arrogance and exploitation. Revenge doesn't always require noise or spectacle. Sometimes, reclaiming control and building something better is more powerful than any public confrontation. Mistreatment can be a catalyst for growth, innovation, and undeniable triumph when met with resilience and strategic action. In the modern professional world, underestimated contributions hold the potential to disrupt entrenched power structures, reminding us that true success often emerges quietly but decisively. Always protect your work, value your skill, and remember that patience, preparation, and ethical persistence can turn even the harshest setbacks into lasting victories. Like this video, share it with friends, subscribe for more stories of resilience and clever revenge, and comment your thoughts on the lessons Harper's journey teaches us.